a warm July afternoon in 1998, 18-year-old Deirdre Jacob walked home to her parents' home in Rosebery, County Kildare. Several neighbours greeted her as Deirdre passed by. She was just yards from her front door when she vanished without a trace. Years later, notorious predator Larry Muprhy emerged as the prime suspect. In 2000, Muprhy was convicted of the abduction and attempted murder of another woman, a victim he was caught dragging into the Wicklow Mountains when two hunters intervened. Some believe Muprhy is responsible for Deirdre's disappearance, but no charges have been brought. The question remains, what really happened to Deirdre Jacob? Welcome to Crimes That Haunt Us, the channel where we dive deep into the most unsettling cases. We're on a mission to hit 1,000 subscribers, and every single one helps keep these stories alive. If you enjoy true crime content like this, hit subscribe and join the community. On a warm July afternoon, a teenage girl walks home, greeting her neighbors, unaware she'll never be seen alive again. Within hours, she's reported missing. By morning, her case dominates headlines, linked to a disturbing pattern of vanished women, some never found, others discovered months later in remote locations. Fear spreads across Ireland. The Vanishing Triangle is born. And so too is a dedicated task force, Operation Trace, tracing, reviewing, and collating evidence. The team was initially assigned to investigate the disappearances of 6 young women. Annie McCarrick, an American student who vanished in March 1993. Jojo Dollard, last seen hitchhiking in November 1995. Fiona Pender, a heavily pregnant woman who disappeared in August 1996. Kira Breen, a teenager who left home one night in February 1997 and never returned. Fiona Sinnott, a young mother who vanished in February 1998. And Deirdre Jacob, last seen near her home in July 1998. But as the investigation deepened, more cases emerged. Women who had been abducted and murdered, their bodies later discovered in remote locations. These are their stories. This series is based on retired Irish detective Alan Bailey's book, Missing, Presumed, featuring first-hand Garda accounts and comprehensive evidence, bringing you the most in-depth look at Ireland's most chilling unsolved cases. The summer of 1998 was a memorable time in County Kildare. The county's Gaelic footballers, under the leadership of the legendary Mick O'Dwyer, had qualified for their first ever All-Ireland final. They had beaten Dublin, County Laois and Meath along the way, defying expectations and sparking a wave of excitement across the county. But for one Kildare family, that summer would become unforgettable, for all the wrong reasons. For Michael and Bernadette Jacob, along with their daughter Kira, the excitement of the season was overshadowed by heartbreak. It marked the beginning of a relentless and painful search for their daughter and sister Deirdre Jacob, who vanished without a trace in July of that year. Their search continues to this day. Unlike other missing persons cases where delays sometimes hampered search efforts, the investigation into Deirdre's disappearance was swift and immediate. Deirdre was last seen walking towards her family home shortly after 3 p.m. on Wednesday, July 28, 1998. When her mother Bernadette arrived home from work at 6 p.m., she was surprised not to find Deirdre there. This initial surprise quickly turned to concern. Panicked, the Jacob family began to contact Deirdre's friends and neighbors, desperately hoping someone had seen or heard from her, but no one had. At this point, Michael and Bernadette went straight to the Newbridge Garda station to report their daughter missing. Thankfully, Gardaí wasted no time. That night, teams of officers, supported by local volunteers, launched a search of the surrounding area. The search began at 11 p.m., focusing on the possibility that Deirdre may have suffered a fall or injury nearby. By early morning, the search was formalized and the investigation intensified. Over the following days, the search area widened. The large tract of bogland located behind the Jacob home was meticulously combed by search teams in a coordinated grid pattern. Meanwhile, Garda sub-aqua units, assisted by local diving clubs, searched the nearby river Liffey, scouring its banks and the riverbed for any trace of Deirdre. At one stage, the water flow was partially diverted to allow for a more thorough examination. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no sign of Deirdre or any of her belongings was ever found. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence to suggest foul play had taken place near her home. The investigation quickly turned to Deirdre's movements that Wednesday. She had spoken to her mother that morning before Bernadette left for work. Deirdre had planned to visit the bank to collect a deposit for her up-and-coming move to London, where she was set to continue her studies at St. Mary's College in Twickenham as part of her teacher training course. Deirdre had successfully completed her first year and was looking forward to returning. That morning, Deirdre attended to some small household chores before leaving home shortly after 10 a.m. to make the 25-minute walk into Newbridge town centre. Her first stop was to visit her maternal grandmother, Bridget O'Grady, with whom she was very close. Bridget, a retired sweet shop owner in her 90s, was delighted to see her granddaughter. Later that morning, Deirdre also caught up with a few former school friends, sharing stories and gossip. Just like in the Annie McCarrick case, some of Deirdre's final movements were captured on CCTV. Footage showed her entering the local Allied Irish Bank on Main Street at 2:20 p.m, where she purchased a bank draft for £180. Afterward, she visited the post office to mail the bank draft. CCTV footage confirmed she left the post office at 3:02 p.m, beginning her journey home. Before heading back, Deirdre stopped once more to visit her grandmother. At least 10 people, many of whom knew Deirdre personally, later told Gardaí they had seen her walking down Barrettstown Road, then onwards towards Rosebery, heading in the direction of her home. Witnesses included a former school friend and her mother, who passed Deirdre in their car and exchanged greetings. A neighbor working on his roof also recalled seeing Deirdre walking by and shouted a friendly hello. The final confirmed sighting came just before 3:30 p.m, when a witness observed Deirdre standing on the grass verge directly across from her home, as if waiting to cross the road. Moments later, she was gone. Deirdre was described as an attractive young woman, dressed in a navy Nike jumper, blue jeans, and blue Nike runners. She carried a distinctive black cat shoulder bag with its bold yellow logo. The absolute normality of her appearance and actions that day only deepened the mystery. Deirdre Jacob was a bright, ambitious young woman from a stable, loving home. She was on the cusp of a promising teaching career, something she had long aspired to. There were no apparent reasons for her to disappear. There were no warning signs, no suspicious circumstances leading up to her disappearance. In the early days of the investigation, there was a flicker of hope. A sighting was reported of a young woman resembling Deirdre in a cafe on Tara Street in Dublin a day or two after her disappearance. The report came from two elderly women who believed they had seen Deirdre. Although never confirmed, Gardaí had no choice but to investigate this sighting. Rumors also circulated in the early stages of the investigation regarding a white van seen driving in the area that afternoon. The occupants were believed to be members of the traveling community, visiting relatives at a halting site not far from Deirdre's home. However, investigations later revealed that most of those residents had been attending a family wedding in Naas that day. The remaining residents fully cooperated with the Gardaí, allowing the search teams to inspect potential hiding places and dump sites without the need for warrants. Despite these efforts, no evidence linked the van or its occupants to Deirdre's disappearance. As time went on, additional reports trickled in from people who believed they had information relevant to Deirdre Jacob's disappearance. One particular account appeared to hold significant weight. A man with a Northern Irish accent repeatedly contacted the Monaghan-based radio station Shannonside Northern Sound. Over the course of 10 separate calls, he claimed to have been driving in the Newbridge area on the day Deirdre disappeared. The man later followed up with a 4-page letter which he sent to the local Leinster Leader newspaper. In these messages, he claimed to have picked up a young woman whom he believed to be Deirdre hitchhiking near Clane, County Kildare. According to his account, she was attempting to travel to Carrickmacross, County Monaghan. Since this was on his route home, he claimed to have offered her a lift. The caller said that they stopped briefly in RD before he dropped his passenger off in Carrickmacross. This account initially seemed credible to both Deirdre's family and the investigating Gardaí. What gave this claim added weight was a little-known detail. Deirdre had indeed spent the weekend prior to her disappearance visiting King's Court in County Cavan with friends. During this visit, she and her friends had taken day trips to Carrickmacross. This coincidence added an unsettling sense of plausibility to the anonymous man's claim. Gardaí explored the possibility that Deirdre may have formed a new friendship or relationship with someone in the Carrickmacross area. Officers interviewed local youths, but no credible evidence emerged to support this theory. Despite this, the anonymous caller persisted. The Jacob family spent countless weekends traveling through Cavan, Monaghan, and even across the border into Fermanagh, distributing Deirdre's photograph and speaking to locals at football matches, parish socials, and other public events in a desperate search for their daughter. Repeated requests for the caller to reveal his identity went unanswered. So, in a bold move, Operation Trace detectives released a recording of the caller's voice to the media via the Garda press office. The man spoke with a distinctive Monaghan Fermanagh accent, and detectives hoped that broadcasting the tape might either compel him to come forward or prompt someone to identify his voice. The response was overwhelming. On January 9, 1999, following the broadcast of the recording, Gardaí received over 100 calls identifying the voice. Several callers pinpointed the man as someone who had lived in a small village just across the border in Fermanagh. Earlier inquiries had already revealed that some of the man's calls had been made from a public telephone box in that very village. However, this posed a major challenge for investigators. Since Gardaí had no jurisdiction in Northern Ireland, they couldn't pursue the man directly. Extradition wasn't possible unless there were grounds to charge him with a crime. Extradition for questioning alone was out of the question, no matter how strong the suspicions against him appeared. However, Gardaí could request the cooperation of the RUC, or Royal Ulster Constabulary, to interview the suspect on their behalf. Under such circumstances, trace detectives could only attend the interview if the man consented to their presence, an unsatisfactory arrangement that rarely yielded useful results. Fortunately, detectives learned through contacts in the RUC that the man in question, known by the alias Joe Robinson, visited Monaghan town regularly to shop at a local supermarket. With this knowledge, Gardaí devised a plan. On the morning of the 21st of January, detectives positioned themselves on the Irish side of the border. When their target crossed into the Republic, officers intercepted his Ford Sierra and detained him. Visibly shaken, the man was taken to Monaghan Garda Station, where he was questioned about Deirdre Jacob's disappearance. Under pressure, he quickly confessed that his entire story had been a lie. He admitted he had never been near Newbridge or Naas that day and had never given Deirdre a lift. His alibi was immediately verified, proving he had not been in the area when Deirdre disappeared. Contemporaneously, the RUC conducted a coordinated forensic search of his home, where he lived with his wife and young family. The only items of significance discovered were several newspaper clippings about Deirdre's disappearance. It quickly became clear that his claims were constructed entirely from the publicly available information. The man confessed to fabricating the story, revealing a tragic motivation. He had lost his own young daughter in a devastating road accident for which he bore some responsibility. Out of grief and empathy for the Jacob family, he claimed he had fabricated the story in an attempt to offer them hope that Deirdre was still alive. For the Jacob family, this revelation was devastating. The false lead had strung them along for 6 months, feeding fragile hope that Deirdre was out there somewhere, safe and alive. The heartbreak of learning this was all a cruel deception. Yet even amid their anguish, Bernadette and Deirdre's sister Ciara showed extraordinary compassion. Despite the pain they had endured, they expressed concern for the well-being of the man who had misled them, recognizing that his actions stemmed from his own personal grief and heartbreak. In the case of Deirdre's disappearance, both the original investigation and the Operation Trace examination proceeded with remarkable precision. Daily updates were meticulously cross-referenced by both teams, investigative leads were pursued to their conclusion, and no line of inquiry was overlooked. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no trace of Deirdre could be found. Detective Alan Bailey described the case as though the earth had opened and swallowed her whole. The most widely accepted theory among both investigation teams was that Deirdre had been overpowered, forced into a vehicle, and transported to a different location. This pointed to an abductor who was highly organized, resourceful, and likely pre-planned the abduction, a classic predator. However, investigators did not believe that Deirdre had been specifically targeted. Instead, it seemed that their abductor had been prowling the area that day, actively hunting for a victim. Several factors would have influenced the predator's decision to strike: the availability of a suitable victim and the presence of a safe environment in which to operate. Once the predator assessed that these conditions were met, he would have acted decisively, undeterred by any potential risk. This theory tragically suggests that Deirdre was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, her family home just minutes away on a bright summer afternoon. Approximately 18 months after Deirdre vanished, a sexual assault occurred less than 50 kilometers from where she was last seen alive. The method and circumstances surrounding the attack bore striking similarities to the behavior of a calculated predator. Larry Muprhy, an Irishman from Baltinglass, County Wicklow, was arrested for the brutal abduction and attempted murder of a woman in February 2000. The victim was a young businesswoman from Carlow. On the night of February 11, 2000, the quiet town of Carlow was shaken by a horrific crime that would have a lasting mark on Ireland's true crime landscape. A local businesswoman finishing her shift and heading to her car had no idea that she was being watched. As she approached her vehicle, a man emerged from the shadows. That man was Larry Muprhy. Without warning, Muprhy abducted the woman, forcing her into his car. She was driven deep into the remote Wicklow Mountains, a desolate stretch of wilderness far from help or hope. There, in the darkness, Muprhy subjected his victim to a brutal and prolonged assault. Over the course of the night, he raped her multiple times, but Muprhy's violence didn't end there. Intent on ensuring his victim would never speak out, he attempted to strangle her to death. His plan seemed inevitable, but fate intervened. By chance, two hunters were nearby, walking through the forested landscape. As they unknowingly approached the scene, Muprhy panicked and fled, leaving his victim battered, traumatized, but miraculously alive. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Muprhy refused to cooperate with Gardaí. He never admitted guilt, nor did he reveal any further details about the crime. His silence left many questions unanswered, adding to the chilling legacy of one of Ireland's most infamous predators. In 2001, Muprhy pleaded guilty to abduction, sexual assault and attempted murder, serving most of his sentence in Arbor Hill Prison. Arbor Hill is unique in that it houses over 100 inmates, many serving lengthy or life terms for serious crimes such as murder and sexual violence. Despite its high security status, life inside Arbor Hill was notably less regimented than other prisons. Rules around inmate interaction were more relaxed. Among the various privileges within the prison was the ability for inmates to brew their own illicit alcohol. This homemade vodka, often stored in 7-Up bottles, was openly visible in cells during Detective Alan Bailey's visits to the prison. Alcohol-fueled conversations between inmates often led to unexpected revelations, and in early 2011, a prisoner alleged that such a conversation had taken place involving Larry Muprhy. This conversation reportedly focused heavily on the abduction and possible murder of Deirdre Jacob. It is important to stress here that Gardaí have only ever heard one side of this account. Muprhy himself has never been formally questioned about the alleged confession, nor has he had the opportunity to confirm nor deny the claims. The details that follow have been previously published in national media, and no effort has been made by Muprhy or any representatives to dispute them. Detective Alan Bailey and his colleague Noel Mooney of the Cold Case Unit interviewed the inmate who had provided this information. At the time, this individual was serving a life sentence in Midlands Prison for the brutal murder of a man over a minor debt. a fact that investigators knew would undermine his credibility. Nonetheless, Bailey would later state that he believed the man's account to be truthful, given that he had no apparent motive to fabricate the story. The informant was already serving a life sentence with no chance of parole for several years, and seemed to stand nothing to gain. According to the prisoner, Muprhy described driving around the Newbridge area in a nondescript family saloon car, specifically looking for a victim. He claimed to have staged his car's interior to appear non-threatening. Children's toys were scattered across the back seat to create an air of innocence. A child's safety seat was fitted in the rear to reinforce this illusion. Muprhy allegedly kept a road map spread out across the passenger seat, a deliberate ruse that allowed him to appear as if he was seeking directions. The informant claimed Muprhy described pulling up beside a young woman walking near Newbridge, waving the map in her direction. When she leaned in through the open passenger window to help him, Muprhy allegedly grabbed her by the hair and dragged her forcefully into the car. He then shoved her down into the footwell of the front passenger seat before speeding away. During this ordeal, the terrified victim continued to resist. Muprhy allegedly claimed he grabbed a hammer from beneath the driver's seat and struck her in the head, rendering her unconscious. The prisoner alleged that Muprhy confessed to driving several miles to a secluded area where he proceeded to assault, murder, and dispose of her body. When questioned about his reasons for revealing this information, the informant stated that as a parent, he feared that Muprhy might strike again. He claimed that if supplying this information could save even one life, he was willing to risk the dangers that came with being labeled a snitch in prison. Detectives repeatedly emphasized to the prisoner that they could offer him no incentives or benefits in exchange for this information. The man claimed he wasn't seeking any. He knew he was years away from parole consideration and insisted that speaking out was his moral duty. When asked if he would be willing to testify in court, he said he would not hesitate to do so. Fully aware of the risks that come with breaking the prison code of silence, the prisoner acknowledged that few inmates would sympathize with Muprhy. Nevertheless, he said he was prepared to face whatever came his way, because in his words, wearing a snitch jacket for the rest of my life is better than having the blood of someone else's daughter on my conscience. The prisoner's testimony was formally recorded, signed, and witnessed without hesitation. While unconfirmed, the chilling details of this alleged conversation offered a plausible explanation for how an abduction could occur in broad daylight with no witnesses. Even with passing traffic nearby, such a blitz-style attack could have unfolded in seconds, leaving the victim disorientated and unable to react before the car vanished down the road. A number of planned searches had already been carried out in the area where the informant claimed Deirdre's body had been concealed. But despite these efforts, no trace of Deirdre Jacob were ever found. In addition, Gardaí undertook extensive forensic examinations of all the vehicles that Larry Muprhy may have had access to at the time of Deirdre's disappearance. The Forensic Science Laboratory in Phoenix Park was consulted prior to this unusual approach, and their experts strongly recommended that the test proceed. Despite the considerable passage of time, advances in crime scene technology had the potential to reveal trace evidence that could have been overlooked years earlier. One of the vehicles examined had even been recovered from a scrapyard in the west of Ireland just one day before it was scheduled to be crushed. Every effort was made to exhaust this line of inquiry, yet no evidence of forensic value was ever recovered. A significant challenge throughout this process was that Gardaí could never be certain they had accounted for every single vehicle Muprhy may have used at the time. Further investigation uncovered two tenuous links between Larry Muprhy and Deirdre Jacob. The first connection related to Muprhy's employment. At the time of Deirdre's disappearance, Muprhy worked for a small building firm based in Wicklow that frequently carried out work in the Newbridge area. After Muprhy's arrest, multiple people contacted Operation Trace claiming that Muprhy had worked on their properties in Newbridge and Naas on the day Deirdre disappeared. The second link emerged several years later. In December 1999, Deirdre's grandmother, Bridget O'Grady, passed away at the age of 94. Sometime after her death, the family gathered to clean out her old sweet shop, a painful task they had delayed for some time. While sorting through drawers and old paperwork, they discovered a leaflet advertising carpentry and general building services. The leaflet bore Larry Murphy's name, a flyer he was known to distribute when canvassing for work. How this leaflet came to be among Bridget O'Grady's belongings has never been established. It remains unknown whether Deirdre was present in the shop when Murphy may have called in. There is no evidence to suggest that Murphy ever carried out work at the sweet shop. The only person who could confirm or deny this is Larry Murphy himself. On the 14th of August 2018, the Gardaí officially upgraded the investigation into Deirdre Jacob's disappearance from a missing person case to a murder inquiry. The decision was based on new information and a comprehensive review of the case, with Larry Murphy identified as the prime suspect. Then, in 2019, an ominous new lead came to light. A witness came forward with information regarding the disappearance of Deirdre Jacob. This witness reported that on the day of Deirdre's disappearance, he was driving into Newbridge in a vehicle with an elevated view. He observed an oncoming car and noticed a person in the front passenger footwell who appeared to be either laughing or crying. He couldn't determine which. This detail was not shared with Gardaí at the time of Deirdre's disappearance for reasons that remain unclear to this day. This account notably aligns with previous statements from one of the prison informants who alleged that convicted rapist Larry Murphy had confessed to abducting a woman in Newbridge. He alleged that Murphy claimed to have pulled the woman into his car, forced her into the front passenger footwell and struck her with a hammer. While media attention remained quiet in the years that followed, detectives continued to work tirelessly to build a case strong enough to present it to the Director of Public Prosecutions, or DPP, in the hope of securing a prosecution. The case against Murphy was built on a series of circumstantial elements that Gardaí believed created a compelling argument for his involvement. These included CCTV footage showing a person of interest in the Newbridge post office just minutes before Deirdre arrived to post her bank draft. This individual bore a striking resemblance to Murphy and to this day has never been identified. Murphy's known employment history involving carpentry work in North Kildare. The alleged Jailhouse Confession from a prisoner serving life who claimed Murphy had confessed in detail to Deirdre's abduction and murder. A second Jailhouse Confession years later from another prisoner who claimed Murphy had admitted to dragging Deirdre through the car window and pushing her into the footwell. Perhaps most significantly, the witness that came forward in 2019, claiming to have seen a person in the footwell of a black car that day. The individual recalled seeing someone either laughing or crying, a chilling detail investigators considered key. But despite these significant leads, on the 16th of July 2022, the Director of Public Prosecutions ultimately ruled that no charges would be brought against Murphy. The DPP cited concerns over the reliability of the jailhouse witnesses and concluded that the circumstantial evidence did not meet the threshold required for prosecution. To this day, the case of Deirdre Jacob remains an active investigation. Murphy, the prime suspect, left the jurisdiction in 2010 after serving 10.5 years of a 15-year sentence for kidnapping and attempted murder of a Carlow woman. On November 5, 2023, the Irish Sun published the CCTV images Gardaí had used in his book of evidence that allegedly showed a man inside the Newbridge post office just 9 minutes before Deirdre arrived. And despite extensive inquiries, this individual has never been formally identified. Investigators noted that the man on CCTV exhibited a nervous habit of scratching his head, a known quirk of Murphy's when anxious, according to those familiar with him. In addition, CCTV footage captured a blue Fiat Punto parked across the street from the post office, a vehicle matching one Murphy had access to at the time. The disappearance of Deirdre Jacob remains one of Ireland's most haunting mysteries. A bright and ambitious young woman, Deirdre had her entire future ahead of her, a future cruelly stolen from her family and friends. Her parents Michael and Bernadette and sister Kira continue to live with the weight of unanswered questions, clinging to hope that one day they will receive the closure they deserve. Deirdre was more than just a missing person. She was a beloved daughter, a sister, a cherished friend, and a young woman full of promise. As her family continues to search for the truth, her memory lives on, in their hearts, in the minds of those who knew her, and in the determination of those who refused to let her story be forgotten. Thank you for listening to Deirdre's story. Please feel free to Leave your own thoughts, comments, and theories in the comment section below, and we'll see you next time.